Hey everyone, welcome to the 62TE demo series. This is out of a 2008 Chrysler Pacifica minivan. So when I say demo, here's what I mean by that, at least in this context. Demo for me is just simply reassembling a core transmission, following all the proper procedures, giving you all the information you need to know, technical specs, specific measurements like things like end play and clutch clearances, and in the case of these transmissions and many other transaxles, turning torque, when it comes to preload on certain bearings in the throughout the case. So we'll go over all that, as well as kind of talk through different considerations and strategies, parts selection, and all that stuff as we go, so that you at least have that context, because I'm not sure when I'm going to get another one of these in. So I figured, hey, I do YouTube, I might as well film the rebuild series. Plus, it's a good video library for me to have and refer back to, for when I do another one. So anyway, we'll get a little bit closer to the bench, and we'll start with the pump and kind of work our way through the input assembly, and then we'll do the combination unit, and then from there we'll start putting everything into the case. Alright, the first thing we're going to tackle is the pump. Now, before you start putting things together, you want to do one last visual and physical inspection of all the components and parts you're going to be working with, just to see if you can spot anything that otherwise would, compromise the job and result in a comeback. So when it comes to the pump, you have two halves, right? You have your pump body and your stator support assembly. For the pump body, you want to visually check and run your finger along the crescent here, looking for signs of wear. So this one has a little bit of wear here on the very end. You can kind of see it. Okay, now if you watch a teardown inspection video on the same transmission, this wasn't evident. At least I didn't see it at the time. Maybe you guys did, but I didn't see it. So like I always tell you, always wait until your parts are all cleaned off before you do your final inspection. Don't do it while you're tearing the unit down. And I know on YouTube we refer to those videos as teardown and inspection, but they're really just teardown videos for all intent purposes, and they're there so that you can kind of see how these units come apart, and by inference how they go back together, at least in terms of the arrangement and order of parts. Okay. You also want to check the inner diameter of the pump pocket as well as the working surface for any unusual scoring. Okay, you can hold it just like this to see if the surface appears to be uneven. However, you want to verify that, confirm or deny, using a depth micrometer. Okay, so you can check the back side of the crescent as well. In most pumps, I don't know if it's true for these, but in most pumps, this back side isn't nearly as worn and not as often as this front side, especially this edge here. Okay. Now, this is a core, so we're not rebuilding this for a customer. So it doesn't really matter, I guess, if this is no good or not. I mean, it's going to go back together regardless. Alright, so on the front side of the pump, you're going to have a seal. You would obviously knock this old one out, and you have your bushing. Okay, note the orientation of the bushing. You have some notches in the bushing. Okay, it doesn't appear to matter which those notches face in terms of their direction, but you'll have staking points here, and you'll want to stake the new bushing once it's installed. Okay, the other thing you may want to do is measure the depth of the bushing. Make sure you install it to the correct depth. And the best way to do that is to install another bushing driver underneath here that's, will serve as a stop, so that when you install it using the bushing driver on the press, it'll come to a complete stop to the correct depth. Alright, the next thing you need to do is assess your condition of your gears and their relationship to the pump itself. So you want to make sure that these gears and this body are serviceable as a service pack. So a group of parts and components that all go together in a subassembly is considered a service pack. So you notice there's dots on both the drive and the driven gear. Alright, that indicates the orientation, at least it appears to, as it relates to this transmission. Now, some transmissions, they'll have dots on both sides, so you don't want to, just get married to that. For the drive gear, you want to make sure that the side with the bevel in it here faces toward the torque converter, because the torque converter is going to install the flats on the converter will engage the flats here on the drive gear, and it'll have this recess, you know, to, I guess, fully seat. So we'll go ahead and put our driven gear in, and then we're going to put our drive gear. Now, don't put any assembly lube in here when you're going to do clearance checks. Alright, because that's what we're about to do now. So, here's a page out of an ATRA publication. I'll put a link in the description so you have the whole thing. It's like 50 pages long and it's filled with great information. But we're going to check all of these clearances here that they have you measure. So, you have 4 of them in total. So you have your pump body, drive and driven gear to deck surface. You have your outer gear and pocket, your outer gear and crescent, and your inner gear and crescent. The outer gear is the driven gear, the inner gear is the drive gear. Alright, so you can measure this using one of 3 methods. Okay, you can use plastic gauge as far as the measurement between the 2 gears in the deck by bolting the stator. I'm not a fan of that because if the stator is warped and you don't know it, then that could throw your measurements here. The methods I prefer are going to be feeler gauges, and for the most precision, and if you're not sure, you know, you get kind of conflicting or inconsistent results with the other 2 methods, micrometers. Okay, so if you're going to do this with micrometers, you're going to mic the thickness of the gear in at least 2 spots for drive and driven, and then you're going to take multiple measurements all along the working surface for each of your drive and your driven gears, and then average it, and then you'll compute your clearance based on those measurements, you know, whatever you come up with. So unfortunately I don't have a straight edge that will actually fit inside this little pocket, so I've been using this thing. So I'm going to go with 1/1000 and 2/1000. Okay, remember the lower end is 8/10,000 and the upper end or upper tolerance limit is 18/10,000. If you're at 2/1000 and it's fitting snugly, that's probably not a problem. Alright, so first thing I want to do is just spin the gear set and make sure it's not coming into any kind of hard contact with, you know, my little quote-unquote straight edge. Okay, as long as it spins freely and it's not wanting to move this or push it, then you know that at least you have potentially a good working surface. Potentially. Okay, and that's assuming that there's nothing visually or physically obviously wrong with it. Alright, so now we'll go ahead and start testing 1.5 thou. Okay, 1.5 thou fits perfectly. I'm going to turn it this way, and we'll come in from behind it so you can see it. Okay, that side's good. This side's giving me fits. Let me see. Okay, it's fitting over here, but it's really not. So that tells me that the surface is slightly uneven relative to this side. But the gears are still turning. So that tells me that this pump, at least insofar as deck to the faces of the 2 gears, appears to be okay. Alright, now we're going to do the other 3 measurements. So I'm going to record, I'm going to record the clearance, gear face and deck to 1.5 thou a piece for drive and driven gear. Alright, the next clearance we're going to measure is going to be between the driven gear and the inner diameter of the gear pocket. So the clearance calls for between 3.5 and 79/10,000ths of an inch. So 3.5 thou to 79/10,000ths. So I have a 4 thou feeler gauge and an 8th thou feeler gauge. So as long as my 4th thou feeler gauge fits, but my 8th thou doesn't, then I'm good. I'm not concerned about the actual measurement itself as much as I am about being within the ranges that, you know, the book calls for. Alright, now I'm not able to get the 4th thou feeler gauge in, so let's see if I can squeeze the 3th thou feeler gauge in. Alright, so 3/1000 is fitting, but it is very tight. Okay, you really ideally want to measure it with both gears installed. Okay, it is fitting. So that tells me this thing is pretty much a minimum spec. Because the 4th thou feeler gauge would not fit. And I'll try it again, but it did not want to go in there. Alright, so I'm going to record 3.5 thousandths. Alright, now what we're going to do is measure the driven gear to the crescent. So this needs to be between 2 and 3 thousandths. I mean, the spec they give, is, taking out the 4 decimal places, but practically speaking, you want to be between 2 and 3. Alright, I'm sorry, I'm measuring the drive gear. I need to measure the driven gear. So this is 2 thousandths. And that fits perfect. Alright, so now I'm going to try 3 thousandths and see how that feels. Okay, 3 actually fits snug, but it fits. Okay, rotate the gears. You want to kind of do this on multiple teeth, or multiple lobes, just to see if you spot anything unusual, like, maybe one lobe is really tight or one lobe is really loose. Okay, those felt the same. So now I'm going to grab the 4th thou gauge. Okay, the limit is 35/10,000, so this should not fit. And it goes in just, maybe 10% of the way down and binds. So I'm good with that. I'm going to record 3 thousandths because that's the maximum size that fit cleanly. Alright, and then the last measurement we're going to take is the drive gear to crescent. So that's going to be 1.5 thou to 3 thousandths. Well, it's 36/10,000ths to 15 thousandths. 36/10,000ths to 15 thousandths. So again, we're kind of going to bracket it. I'm going to go right to 16 thou and see if that'll fit. And it goes in just a hair before it binds. Let's check 10 thousandths. And 10 thousandths kind of fits, but I'm thinking it's tighter than that. So we're going to go right down to 5 thousandths now. And 5 thousandths fits, and it fits snugly. So okay, 5 thousandths is the number. Alright, so that's the pump body. Pretend we installed a new bushing and seal. The pump body would be done. I would leave the pump O-ring off until you're ready to install the whole pump for the final time after you've done end-plate checks. Alright, next is going to be the stator support. You're going to check the inner diameter here for sealing ring groove wear. Just get up in there with a finger, do a physical inspection, do a visual inspection. You know, you really want to eyeball this because you don't want to miss anything. You also want to check for sharp burrs in this location where you have your feed ports. Check your splines. Make sure they're not excessively worn, in other words, narrower than they should be. Make sure nothing or, no pieces of teeth are missing, chips, chunks missing out of them, things like that. Okay, I mean, something like that would be obvious as soon as you look at the transmission with the torque converter off, but it's still stuff you want to look at. It's stuff you want to look for. Alright, for the stator half, your main concern is the working surface here. You obviously don't want this to be warped, scored up, damaged, or, otherwise compromised. So, in my opinion, the most effective way to check this is to use a straight edge, just like this, and then shine a flashlight underneath the straight edge to see if you can glimpse any light poking out underneath of it. Alright, I'm looking from the side. I actually don't see any. I'm at eye level with it. Let me see if I can kind of angle it up so you could see it without spilling the straight edge. Let's see if I can pull this off or not. Alright, just trying to hold the straight edge steady. I didn't see any light coming through when I looked at it, so without damaging the stator with the straight edge, what you want to see is a perfectly flat surface. So now that we've established that the pump is in good reusable shape, we have pretend installed a new bushing and seal, we're ready now to put this thing together for the final time. So I know this is like kind of tedious and cumbersome, etc., but if you're building these transmissions, whether it be for yourself or if you're doing it occupationally or for money, either as a side gig or as a full-time job, it's worth spending the extra time to take these measurements and do this kind of diligence so that you can avoid the thing coming back on you. I mean, the whole point of all of this measurement and validation and quality control stuff is to A, reduce the risk of comeback, meaning to reduce the risk of increased expenditures as a result of comebacks or having to do rework, and of course to gain customer confidence and satisfaction so that this customer, let's pretend this is a job, will refer other potential customers to you, and so on and so forth. I mean, ideally, you want to have most of your pipeline, maybe say 75% of it, coming from referral business, not necessarily advertisements like Facebook and Craigslist and other places, because let's face it, that stuff, those avenues are very cyclical. Sometimes it rains, it pours, and then sometimes you have a drought. And if you can't afford to have any droughts, you want to have a steady flow of referral business. Alright, so you want to line up your feed holes here with those on the body. and then just carefully set it into place. And then you're going to have 6 bolts that take 20 foot-pounds of torque. And there's no tightening sequence for this. All you're going to do is just torque them to spec. You can go crisscross. I mean, I think that's, generally speaking, what most manuals will tell you to do is, you know, tighten everything in a crisscross pattern, torquing them to spec. If there's 6 or more bolts, if there's like 5 bolts or 4 bolts, then you can just go every other one until they're all torqued down. So up to you how you want to do it. The 13 millimeter. Get it off this thing because it makes a lot of noise. Not too far. 20 foot-pounds is what we want. Alright, if you have your new torque converter or a checking tool of some sort, you'll want to go ahead and just insert the pump onto the converter real careful, or insert your checking tool and confirm that the the gears are rotating nice and smooth. You obviously don't want to bind. I don't have a checking tool for this, and nor do I have a converter, so we're just going to have to assume they're perfectly fine. So that's the deal when you're relatively new to a transmission and you do not have all the special tools you need. So I can get this O-ring off of here without damaging it. I don't want to damage it because I am going to put it back on, because this thing has to go back in the cores yard. In fact, you know what? I'm just going to leave it because it doesn't seem like it's going to come off without me breaking it. Alright, that's the pump. We'll put that aside. Now we're going to head and work on the input complex. So that's pretty much everything you see right up in here.